Never used to get this many cameras when we were in opposition. Anywhere you want me to look, just straight through there, or? Yeah, no worries. Just let me know when you're ready. Sure. Senator Murray Watt, Minister for Emergency Management. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming along on a rainy Brisbane morning. It's a great pleasure to be here with my good friend and from a very long period of time, Stephen Miles, the Deputy Premier of Queensland, and of course Brendan Moon doing a great job running the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things today, and obviously happy to take questions about other federal issues as well. For starters, we've got some really good news for Queensland to announce, which I'll come to in a moment, but I did just want to begin by acknowledging the pretty serious flooding situation that we may be facing in New South Wales over the next couple of days. I've been briefed about this a number of times now over the last 24 hours and have been in contact with the New South Wales Emergency Services Minister, Steph Cook, as well, to find out what support we can provide. Basically, really from about tomorrow through to Monday and Tuesday, there is a high risk of quite severe flooding, particularly in the Illawarra and Sydney regions, around the Hawkesbury-Nepean region in particular. And many of you will be aware that that is a region that has really copped a lot of flooding, not just this year, but also last year and the year before that as well. So the ground is very wet, and that's why the heavy rainfall that we're expecting in New South Wales over the next couple of days really does present quite a serious flooding risk. I want to assure people that the federal government, the Albanese government, is 100% prepared for what might lie ahead. I think one of the things that we've learned over the last couple of years is that when we don't have a federal government that takes responsibility and isn't proactive, bad things can happen. And this time, the Albanese government is determined to make sure that we are better prepared for natural disasters than we have been in the past, and that we are proactive when it comes to being prepared and being ready to take action. So that's why last night I and the Albanese government as a whole approved ADF support for the New South Wales government at the request of the New South Wales government. The New South Wales government have requested that we provide 2 nighttime helicopters, Defence Force helicopters with special equipment, particularly for potential rescues, and they have also requested that we provide 100 troops, and we have approved both of those requests. So the helicopters will be ready from this evening, basically from when it gets dark tonight. The troops will be available from tomorrow morning should they be required, whether it be for community evacuations or clean up after an event. We all hope that these resources won't be needed, but the point is that we're making sure that we are ready if they are needed. So those resources will be on standby when the New South Wales government deems that they're necessary. This whole operation obviously will be led by the New South Wales government, but the federal government plays an important role in providing troops, defence resources and other resources to back up our states when they need it. So the message to everyone in New South Wales is take this heavy rainfall seriously. We know that the ground is already wet and it won't take a lot more for flash flooding to occur. Please, if it's flooded, forget it. Be sensible when you're on the roads. Stay off the roads if you can. We're not exactly sure how this weather event will pan out, but it could be quite serious over the next couple of days, and we'll obviously keep people informed while they take account of emergency warnings that are being issued by authorities. Turning to better news, as I say, I'm really pleased to join with Stephen here today to announce a joint Commonwealth federal funding operation that is the next instalment in making sure that we build back better in southeast Queensland and right across the state after the recent floods. What we're announcing today is that there is a joint Commonwealth state funding package of $170 million to build back better. Now, many of you will be aware that after we see big natural disasters like the ones we've seen this year, we do tend to see big injections of funding from the federal government and the state government to repair infrastructure, roads, bridges, culverts, all those kinds of things. But what's different here today is that we've actually also come up with a commitment that is not just about repairing that infrastructure to the condition that it was in beforehand, but to build back better and make sure that it is more resilient for future events. I know how frustrating it is for local governments, for state government agencies over the years to have severe damage caused to infrastructure only to repair it to the same condition and see exactly the same kind of thing happen the next time we have a flood or another natural disaster. So this funding is the biggest injection of state and Commonwealth betterment funding that we have ever seen into Queensland, and it's a sign of the really positive things that we can see happen for our communities when we actually have cooperation from our federal and state governments. I think all Queenslanders were really disappointed with the kind of bickering and finger pointing that we saw from the last federal government, where they had to be dragged kicking and screaming to the table to provide funding for Queensland. The Albanese government wants to take a different approach. We want to cooperate with the Palaszczuk government for the benefit of all Queenslanders, and that's what this funding's about today. I might hand over to Stephen to cover that off, and obviously happy to take questions on other things. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Murray. And isn't it important to see the new Australian government working really closely with states, in this case New South Wales, in preparation before disaster hits? Our thoughts and our hearts with everyone south of the border who might be affected by this coming disaster. Again, we've been able to work together with the new Australian government to deliver this new $170 million Betterment Fund. This will support local councils in particular to build back their infrastructure to ensure that in future disasters it's back up and running really quickly. And we've run 4 of these programs before. This will be the 5th. And we know it works. At each new disaster, those infrastructure projects that are funded through our betterment programs are back up and running. They are more resilient quicker. In fact, 85% of those projects that have been funded under our betterment programs are back up and running pretty much straight away after those disasters. That's saved us $250 million over recent disasters. So $250 million saved by building back better, by investing in the resilience of our infrastructure. And so now we'll work with local governments. They'll be able to apply for these funds. There'll be criteria and guidelines that will assist them to determine which projects are best suited to this kind of betterment funding. But it's very, very welcome to be able to deliver this together with the new Australian government, and the Queensland Reconstruction Authority leads this work. They do a great job, and I'll ask Brendan to say a bit more about this program.
Thank you, Deputy Premier. Minister Brendan Moon, Chief Executive Officer of the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. Over the past 10 years, we've learnt that reconnecting communities quickly after a disaster is a cornerstone of successful recovery. But the real challenge has been is how do we reduce risk into the future and keep those communities safer into the future in the face of significant challenges from the climate that we experience here in Queensland. This will be the 5th of the betterment programs that have been delivered over the course of the last 10 years, and what we have seen as a result of those betterment programs has not only been a saving in money, but also it keeps communities connected immediately after the event. And some 85% of those assets that have been bettered in the last 10 years have actually been functional in the immediate aftermath of the disasters. Given the size and scale of this event, over some 66 councils throughout Queensland, we've been working very, very closely since the event actually hit. And we've been working with councils to understand what their priorities are and what their solutions are to reduce the vulnerability of their infrastructure networks. From Monday, councils will be able to lodge their submissions for processing and approval so that we can get cracking on reconnecting those communities. Thank you.
Senator Watt, I think from memory, Brisbane City Council's infrastructure damage from total about $300 million. Is this money going to be enough to cover the extent of the disaster that we saw?
No, so what we're announcing today is slightly different to that. Obviously, the usual funding arrangements that happen after a disaster where federal and state governments kick in to repair local government infrastructure, that will continue to happen in the normal way. What we're announcing today is something more than that, which is to make sure that when we do repair infrastructure, we actually take it to a more resilient standard to make sure that we are building back better. So Brendan may have more details as to how much has been approved or with the process in terms of funding infrastructure repairs for the Brisbane City Council and others, but this is something separate to simply replacing the infrastructure that's been damaged already.
And separate again to the $740 million that
Yes, it is. So yesterday, Minister de Brenny and some of my federal colleagues obviously released the guidelines for that new funding, which is the Resilient Homes package. So this package today is something different again.
Now that you have released the guidelines on that program, when can we expect the money to be drawn down from that fund and homeowners can make real change?
My understanding is that the state government is still working through that, and Stephen may have some more details on that. But obviously we're keen to get that money out the door as quickly as we can. But it was important, first of all, to come out with the guidelines to explain the kinds of things that it would be used for. Look, we recognise that the world economy that we face at the moment is is in an uncertain state, and we are concerned about the potential for the US to fall into recession. Obviously, I think it's no secret that we've come to office inheriting an extremely large debt, large deficits, rising inflation, low wages, some really difficult economic conditions. So we will be working very hard to protect Australians from the economic climate that we have inherited. But the reality is things are going to be tough. But I can assure everyone that we're doing everything we can to keep people in work, get wages moving and get the Australian economy moving as best as possible. Yeah. When it comes to interest rate rises, of course, they are judged and decided by the Reserve Bank, and that is an independent authority which will make its own decisions. But as I say, we know that it's a difficult environment for people, and it's a difficult environment for a new government to take office in. But we put forward a number of commitments heading into the election around dealing with cost of living pressures, cheaper childcare, cheaper power prices, even cheaper electric vehicles. So we'll be certainly taking a lot of action at the federal level to try to bring down some of those cost of living pressures. And of course, on the other end of it, we want to see wages get moving again. We supported an increase to the minimum wage recently and welcomed the fact that the Fair Work Commission awarded that. And hopefully we can start seeing some movement around wages, which will also assist Australians deal with that cost of living pressure. Yeah. Well, they'll flow through at different times, but I think the main focal point will be this year's federal budget. So the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, will obviously be bringing down the first Albanese government budget in October, and we'll be really making clear about the delivery path for a lot of those commitments going forward.
Senator, with COVID, the new Omicron variant, there's a lot of concern in Queensland that the show is looking at potentially bringing back masks. What's your view on that, and does the federal government have any control over that?
Yeah, look, it is obviously very concerning what the outlook in terms of COVID, and if we look at what's happening in the Northern Hemisphere, that gives us some impression of what might be lying ahead for Australia. In terms of masks, we haven't received any health advice about that at this point at the federal level. Those decisions do tend to be made by state governments, and again, Stephen might want to add to that. I know that this is something that health officials have been discussing nationally, but we haven't received any advice on that at this point. Yep.
Sorry, Channel 10 just said.
Oh, sorry.
Beijing has issued a staff warning to Australia about the South China Sea, basically warning Australia will bear the consequences of any military accident in the South China Sea. What's the government's reaction?
Well, again, we have seen over a number of years now China become more assertive and more aggressive in its rhetoric and in its actions. What I can tell Australians is that the Albanese government will always stand up for our national interest. We will always stand up for our values, and we will also not seek to make political gain out of our relationship with China or any other country. So we take these issues seriously, but we will always stand up for Australia's national interest on these matters.
How important is freedom of movement in the South China Sea, particularly for trade?
Look, I think it's probably more appropriate that some of my colleagues, such as the Defence Minister and the Trade Minister, comment on those things. As I say, we will always stand up for Australia's national interest when it comes to dealing with China or any other country. All good? No worries.
Do you mind if I just speak to the local government electric caps first, and then happy to take questions on anything? So we're also announcing today that we've concluded consultation on what the expenditure caps for local government elections should be. We made a commitment to introduce expenditure caps for local government elections off the back of recommendations from the CCC and a parliamentary inquiry. We issued a discussion paper a couple of months ago. We've then sought feedback, in particular from local government, but also other stakeholders. And off the back of that feedback, we've finalised the government's position, which will now be drafted into a bill to be put before the Parliament towards the end of the year. The proposed caps will be very similar to what were in the discussion paper, apart from two modifications that were made in response to that consultation, in response to stakeholder feedback. Of particular interest, we have increased the proposed expenditure cap for the Brisbane City Council elections in recognition of the amount that candidates have tended to spend in those elections and the expensive media market that those candidates need to buy into. We've also moved to limit the pooling of third-party expenditure. You'll recall there was concern raised about that element, which was modelled on the current state scheme, and so instead, in this proposal, third parties won't be able to pool their expenditure caps. I think this just underlines how, in a good policy process, we can float ideas, receive feedback, incorporate that feedback into the final government position. The bill itself will, of course, now be subject to a parliamentary committee process, as bills regularly are. Now I'm happy to take questions.
Over those caps with third parties being able to spend much more than candidates. What's the situation now?
That's right. So in response to that feedback, we've moved to limit the pooling of expenditure by third parties. So third parties cannot pool their expenditure cap from across different local government areas. That was in response to feedback in particular from the Brisbane City Council.
Is there a cap the same as the candidate?
So there, I think we've circulated what all of the different caps will be. From memory, the third-party cap is set at the mayoral candidate amount for that local government area.
DP candidates can pool their resources, their caps. Is there a risk then that party politics will creep into local governments that otherwise is not included at the moment?
No greater risk, I don't think. Obviously, it's up to parties whether they contest local government elections. At the moment, they really only do in Brisbane, although outside of Brisbane, many candidates are still aligned to political parties, although they run as independents. I don't think this expenditure cap will change that at all, because at the moment there is no expenditure cap. So the benefit that you're suggesting is there already, and parties have actually reduced their involvement in local government generally.
Minister, just on the Omicron, the Chief of Officer warning that discussions are underway for masks to come back. What is actually happening? What can you tell us?
Yeah, nothing's changed about the health advice at this stage. We, of course, always take the health advice on board, and as soon as that health advice changes, we'll let people know. We are seeing a lot of COVID cases. So today, nearly 5,000 new COVID confirmed cases, about 3,500 of those self-reported from RAT tests. That's about 10 times the number of new flu cases. There are more than 500 people in Queensland hospitals right now with COVID. That's about the size, the equivalent of a medium-sized hospital. So imagine one of our medium-sized hospitals full just of COVID patients. So we're clearly feeling the effects of this in the community, in workplaces and in hospitals. At this stage, the health advice remains. Please carry a mask with you. If you can't social distance, use the mask. If you're ever concerned, use the mask. And of course, if you have symptoms, get tested. And if you're eligible for a vaccination or a booster, please go and get vaccinated. That's the thing that can make the biggest difference.
It is on the cards, it is possible.
2.5 years in, I've learned not to predict these things, but the Chief Health Officers continue to meet regularly. They continue to compare notes about how the virus is spreading in each of the states, as well as the intelligence that we get from right around the world. And so they'll continue to monitor that. But if anyone is concerned, please carry a mask. There's no rule against using masks. In fact, if you're ever worried, you should use one. They have a benefit. They do keep you safe.
Dr. Gerard, was quoted saying there is growing pressure to mandate masks again, and discussions are being held. So, I mean, are you aware of those discussions?
I'm aware that those discussions are ongoing. Nothing has changed about the health advice at this stage. If the health advice changes, we'll inform Queenslanders as we have throughout the entire pandemic.
Under the new 30-day cabinet document release rule, can Queenslanders expect to know how much will it cost the taxpayers?
We'll discuss on Monday how to implement those changes to cabinet submissions. We have previously indicated that there are commercial terms regarding that particular contract that limit what can be disclosed. My approach has always been to make available whatever information I can, and I'll continue to have that approach.
Carol, there's growing calls for Carol to resign after she's been charged now 3 times over the limit. What is your view, and do you have any powers in your role as local government to do anything?
Well, obviously the situation is very concerning, and I've heard the feedback from the Redlands community that they certainly think that this behaviour is inappropriate from an elected leader. I certainly find it very concerning. I've sought advice from my department about what appropriate action would be from the local government minister's perspective. That advice, which I'm happy to release, says that while there are powers reserved that would allow the minister to suspend or dismiss a mayor, that it has generally been reserved for those offences which are considered integrity offences and fall under the definition of integrity offences under the Act. The advice thus far has been that this particular offence would not trigger the integrity matters under the Act. However, since then, the mayor has been charged and the police have reported the blood alcohol content of her subsequent blood test. Given those 2 new facts, I will now seek new advice from my department about whether that materially changes their advice to me about what action would be appropriate, and again, I'll provide that advice once I've received it.
She's clearly drinking during work hours.
There's obviously a threshold between what is considered appropriate and what is a breach of integrity under the Act. That's a legal definition under the Act. The advice I have thus far from my department is that while that behaviour might not be appropriate, it does not trigger those integrity offences, which would either provide me with justification to sack or suspend an elected mayor, or alternatively automatically trigger sacking or suspension. So let me get that additional advice now that we have these 2 pieces of new information that we did not have at the time that I sought that advice during the week, and I'm happy to provide more information once I've received it. It's Saturday morning. We've received both of those pieces of information this morning. I've had preliminary discussions with my department, but I want to get that written advice.
So would it be today?
Yes, I think she should at least, in the very least, step aside until the court processes are concluded, allow the community to have an acting mayor during that process. I think that's what would be best for Redlands and probably best for Councillor Williams. Obviously this is a difficult situation for her, but she has done the wrong thing. She's been caught doing the wrong thing. In the very least, she should step aside.
Nicola Stepanoff has offered to stay on until you find a permanent integrity commissioner. The government said that won't be necessary, so we'll have an acting integrity commissioner going through a estimates process. How is that anything other than the government attempting to avoid scrutiny?
Well, look, it's not unusual to have acting appointments in the interim between when incumbents move on and new people are appointed. There is a recruitment process underway, an appropriate recruitment process underway. We'll continue to go through that process.
But she's offered to stay on, though. Isn't it beneficial to have somebody who understands the office going through estimates?
Oh, look, she's resigned. I understand she's now finished up. We have an entirely appropriate acting integrity commissioner in place while a permanent appointment is made.
Minister, the opposition has just come out swinging again about Bruce Saunders, saying that the Premier needs to do more, and to ask you what you're going to do. He's claiming that he's seeking vengeance on whistleblowers because of the Goldrake report. What is your view about his behaviour, and should he be disciplined at least?
I'll let him speak for himself. What I know is that the Premier has been very clear that we take full responsibility for the matters reported in the Coldrake report. We commissioned the review. We have accepted the recommendations. We look forward to implementing them. Today's my first chance to speak publicly since we received that report, and I would like to say very clearly that I agree with the Premier, that we welcome this report, that we look forward to implementing its recommendations, that clearly some of the case studies included in the report are inappropriate. We don't want to see that happen, and we just look forward to getting on with the job of implementing these reforms. They will make Queensland a national leader in integrity.
She said, yes, she just said Bruce has been Bruce, but I mean, is that good enough when he's saying that whistleblowers in a way should be penalised, which the whole Coldrake report is about whistleblowers being protected to come forward and say.
Look, I'll let Bruce speak for himself. What I can speak for is the government and our position, and that is that the matters reported in the Coldrake review we don't want to see continue, and so we'll be implementing those recommendations. Look, no one should be bullied at work. I represented public sector workers for nearly 10 years. I saw instances of bullying across multiple governments, and anything that we can do to make people feel safer at work, we should.
So whistleblowers not being threatened under these new...
Yeah, whistleblowers have protections under the public interest disclosures. We'll continue to support those protections.
Councillors have voted to reinstate they said some of them have said that was based on the report that wasn't put forward. There was not really any information that Nair provided, and it was tampered with that report. What's your sense?
Look, I only, as for the to and fro within the council, I only really know what's been reported. I have received a complaint from one of the councillors, and I'll refer that through the appropriate mechanisms. I disagree with the decision to keep the name of that infrastructure. However, the naming of local government infrastructure is a decision for the local government. They are duly elected representatives and are entitled to make that decision, even if I think it's wrong.
It's a bad look honouring a convicted sex offender.
Oh, it is, yes.
So an investigation is underway, I guess, for
Yes, the allegation that I have relates to the matter that you've raised. I will seek advice and refer that through the appropriate mechanisms.
Just on the current review, are you likely to make a decision today, or will it be next week?
No, we'll seek advice. It'll probably be during the week on a work day. Thank you.
How fast you move.
No.
If it's going to be 6 or 7
If it's going to be today, I'll be here again. That's
yeah, it's a work day for all.
every day.
I know.